Well, this is Cabin Conversations, a regular podcast here at Woodlands Church. I'm Dave Bondison here with co-host Whitney Swenson.
Hey, Dave.
Good morning, Whitney.
Good morning.
Yeah, it's Monday morning, earlier than usual. So
It is.
It feels like, I attended a 10:30 service yesterday, and that was less than 24 hours ago. So look at the turnaround time of this thing.
We're
It's
just
absolutely incredible.
fast thinkers,
So,
apparently.
Yeah, we're just highly productive people. That's my middle name, Dave Highly Productive Bondison. Our guest this week is Gabby Allard. Hey, Gabby.
Hi,
Good
guys.
to have you
Gabby.
back. So this is your third time on season 3 of Cabin Conversations, but not your third time on a podcast this year
Yeah.
because y'all went and did your own thing.
Yeah, I'm just putting in the reps.
So, yeah,
Podcasting.
you're a podcast expert. So
I don't know about that.
we walked in and you were turning stuff on and setting stuff up here, which is actually really convenient as a guest because usually
You know more than I do at this point,
Yeah.
as far as the cameras go.
Yeah.
guests usually wander in and just kind of like
Sit down,
Yeah, I don't
Watch
know.
you run around because I don't know that much either.
Yeah, it's just some on switches. We can
Yeah.
figure that out
Yeah.
at some point. So,
Yeah.
but good. Yeah, tell us a little bit about the youth podcast.
Yeah, it's very early days still. We're still kind of creating what we exactly want it to look like. But right now, we did a Q&A night a few months back, and students sent in way more questions than we could ever hope to possibly answer in a 30-minute window. So right now, we are just working our way through those leftover questions from that Q&A night. And sometimes we bring students on with us.
Oh, fun.
So we'll record one this afternoon with Lauren Johnson. She's coming in.
Super cool.
And so our students bring a question with them as well. And we just talk through different questions that students have
That's
and process what it means to follow Jesus through those questions.
What
Mhm.
type of questions are you getting?
So many good ones. Questions about the Bible, questions about how to form good habits in Bible reading, prayer, questions about what the Bible is, why it's important, why we read it, questions about life. One of the questions we answered last week was, is it okay to be afraid of death? So kind of heavy stuff sometimes too.
Mhm.
Students have lots of really good questions. And
Yeah.
lots of questions that adults actually have, but students are less afraid to
Right.
ask them.
Right.
Whereas adults were sometimes like, oh, I should know that by now. I feel awkward. I'm not
Yeah.
going to ask that.
Yeah.
Whereas students were just like, why aren't dinosaurs in the Bible? What's that about? And like
Sure.
aren't afraid to.
Yeah.
you know.
Great question.
Sure. And you also have given them the opportunity to ask those questions in a kind of anonymous, like they
Yeah.
submit them anonymously, where
Mhm.
right now, if you're an adult and you want to ask a question about dinosaurs, you do it in your small group and you're like, ooh,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know the answer to this one. Can you help me?
Yeah. pretty
So-
much.
Is that something we should do? Should we allow anonymous questions? Would that pack out our time here
How would
on
we
Cabin
do that?
Conversations? You just create a form on Google Forms. You put it out. You put the link out there in
Mhm.
our, sort of situation. That's pretty easy to
Sure.
come up with. Those are fun questions.
They
That
are
just
fun
sounds
questions.
like fun.
Yeah. It is a lot of fun.
So
Or we could just give the people that listen to this access to their Q&A.
So where
Slap.
do your podcasts? Oh yeah, they could answer the questions
Yeah,
for
for
us.
us.
You don't want to answer those questions.
No, we
Those are
could, but
like-
it's like it's double. I don't know if we need to do double the work. They're doing a lot of good work.
we'll answer the grown-up questions, which are sometimes really boring.
Also,
so-
sometimes the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of crossover.
Yeah. I'm bridging that generation.
So your podcast is available at the Woodlands Youth YouTube channel.
Yes. Yeah. Currently only on YouTube because we
Wow.
don't have a name for it yet. And
Okay.
you have to name your podcast before you can put it on Spotify.
So
and
you're not
Apple.
syndicated on any of those other things yet.
Nope. So if
Exciting.
anyone wants to name our youth podcast, we have our ears open.
Yeah. So
Our youth podcast.
our youth podcast
Our
at
youth
Woodlands
podcast.
Church.
There we
So,
go.
Yeah.
Creative juices are flowing down.
Here's the other delightful thing that Gabby did coming on is she brought, you can see here,
Cookies.
these incredibly delicious looking cookies. I had to ask her how many I'm allowed to eat, and she has given me a quota. So I'm going to be enjoying those. But we mentioned, we've talked, and maybe you more than me have talked, Whitney, a lot about food and snacks. And we've had
Oh.
some robust conversation
Yes.
about the definition of desserts.
Yes.
But I think that we need more eating as part of this
Oh my goodness.
activity.
But the thing about this is still a listening activity.
Yeah.
And it's viewable. But listening to mouth noises is one of the worst experiences.
These are so perfectly made.
They
I
are
can't-
they are the amazing. I already had one. They're delicious.
It's
But
like
mouth noises, like Sophie will come, put something in her mouth, and crawl up right next to me and start chewing. And I literally am just like, I'm sorry, you got to get away from me until you're done. I just can't. I can't manage
But
The
isn't that what
sound.
like the wizardry of production is supposed to remove? Is some of the like the
But it's
mouth
not going to
noises?
remove it right now. Like you put that in your mouth, and I'm going to hear
you're
you.
gonna have to. So I'd have to mute myself.
Yeah. You can
That's
chew all
its
you
own
want.
niche of content, though. Like mukbangs,
Yeah.
that was like a whole thing on YouTube. And
That
like,
can't be the niche that we're going for. Here.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Of like people just sitting down and eating
ASMR
food.
sort of
yeah,
stuff.
ASMR
No,
stuff.
no.
Mm-mm.
Mm.
No.
So
I
now,
love-
now I've got to figure out how to eat this cookie without getting a bunch of. we're
you
gonna-
you chew. I'll ask her a
Yeah,
question.
there we
You're
go.
a third guest.
Yes.
Third time guest. So we've talked about Morning Beautiful. We've talked about reads,
Mhm.
what you're reading, what your content you're consuming. My question is, what does community look like for you right now?
Mm.
So just to give you a minute to think about it, I'm trying to fill out the idea of I'm the group life director.
Yeah.
And I think groups offer such an incredible way to connect, to be centered around Jesus Christ and helping each other, encouraging others, supporting each other,
Mhm.
pushing each other towards Jesus. But it's not the only way to be connected to people. And
Yeah.
so I want to broaden that and just say, what does community look like what does it look like for you?
Mhm.
We asked John the same question. So we get a little bit wider view of what it can look like to be connected to the body of Christ and in community
Yeah.
with people that are following Jesus.
Yeah.
So what does that look like for you?
Yeah. I'm definitely in a stage of life right now where I'm kind of rebuilding
Mm-hmm.
community. I'm in a new stage of life, but in an old familiar place. I was raised in Stevens
Yeah.
Point. So I know what community has looked like for me here in the past when I was in junior high, high school,
Yeah.
college. But now I'm working
Mhm.
and I'm in a different stage of life. I'm married now. So I'm, to be totally candid, am in the early stages of building that community.
Sure.
And so, I mean, a really easy resource for that is group life.
Yeah.
We've started, Elijah and I are in a life group that meets every other week.
Mhm.
It's married couples. And then on the off weeks, we alternate, just the guys meet and then just the girls meet.
Sure.
So that's what I'm going to be doing tonight is
Sure.
meeting with the ladies of my small group. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Building community is sometimes hard and it takes time and there isn't really a quick solution for it. It's just
There is a thread. There's themes happening. It's intentionality required, time required. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now it's just kind of putting in the time and effort of,
Yeah.
okay, these are the people around me right now. So I'm gonna be intentional. I'm gonna meet with them. They're really lovely people. I
Yeah.
really like them. So I'm just gonna do the work of sharing myself more and more with them as they share more and more with me. So
I'm glad that I'm back from that cookie. That was an experience too. I would say that this is a strategy to keep me quiet in the future podcasts
bring
too.
cookies.
I'll just disappear for a while. It's good that they're lovely people. If you were able to say that, I would have been a different experience. Like, Gabby, this is live, remember? But not live. Tenacity seems like a really, really important piece there too. So you said time and intentionality.
Mhm.
But even with those two investments, there's a lot of time it just doesn't work.
Mhm.
There's a lot of time life group doesn't click
Mhm.
or doesn't fit. Or you're meeting with someone and you're just like, So what category do we have for like doesn't fit or doesn't work? Because there's people, right? They're
Mhm.
like, this is a wonderful person.
Mhm.
And I'm really compelled by this person. And I really respect this person. And I really don't have a lot of desire to spend time with this person.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
mhm.
I think something came up in our coaches meeting last week. The word affinity, like having something that kind of draws you together, something that outside of. So if you're coming to Woodlands, if you're engaging in Christ-centered community, you have Christ as the main line of affinity. Sometimes there needs to be a little bit something more to like want to. If you're talking to my husband and you can't talk about hunting or fishing, it might feel like the conversations are kind of hard to have.
Yeah.
It was initially for me before I even started dating him. I'm like, what do you got anything else in there that we can talk about? Like this, I don't want to talk about hunting. I don't want to talk about fishing. What else can we talk about? So I think affinity is a piece that is. I'm not sure it's always required. I think you can find desire to spend time with people that you don't have any affinity with. But is that true? I don't know.
So I'm processing. Yeah, that's an interesting thing because is community community in the church, like Christ as our affinity connection,
Mm-hmm.
produces and promotes, and this could be a segue into the sermon discussion, but peace,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's
Mhm.
that's the unity. That's the source of
Mhm.
our unity.
Mm-hmm.
But our community feels a little more narrow than unity.
Mm.
Like I'm going to have
Mhm.
unity with a broad group of people, but
Mhm.
there's community and then deeper community even
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that's going to be fueled by probably affinity, probably having gone through life stage transitions with
Mhm.
people,
Yeah.
like the people that went through parenting together. That deepens that community.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably intentionality, mentorship, all of those things tucked in there.
Yeah.
But those are really good things to process.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think there's too this is a thread that's been going through my mind for a long time, but we're finite humans with finite capacity for relationship, for emotional. We have a finite emotional capacity, mental, all of it, time. And so to be in this size church and say your community is this size church is unrealistic and doesn't actually honor the fact that we are finite creatures and God has given us
Yeah.
boundaries to stay within. So I think it's a good distinction that Christ is our unifier as a big church, but that doesn't mean that you're in deep community with everybody here. But there's I have deep community with just a few. I have community with
Mhm.
broader pieces. I have connection with even a broader circle.
Yeah.
And then I have unity within this body because we are Christ followers. It's interesting concentric circles, maybe.
yeah, and really helpful to process through. And I'm really glad to hear that you and Elijah are stepping into a life group. Just broadly, kind of a question, and then I'm going to mute myself and step over and adjust something while you answer. How would you have sought community if, like, you're looking at your schedule, looking at your patterns, you're like, life group doesn't fit for us right now in this stage and season? What would you have done?
That's a really good question. I think I would have just kept asking. I would have said,
Yeah.
okay, what connections do we
Currently have.
have here, and what connections does the church offer? I mean, I
Mhm.
know there's kind of spiritual growth partners.
Mhm.
There's that piece running, and then I make connections with people here. I mean, being on staff is a huge privilege
Yeah.
that I know not everyone has quite the Christian community at their fingertips
That we do. Mhm.
But yeah, I know people at the church, so I
Mhm.
think I would have probably just kept asking, kept going, said, okay, who do I know? Who do I know that seems like a nice person?
Mhm.
I mean, it's almost like, I feel
Yeah.
like developing friendships and community is almost kind of like dating in a way of
Sure.
like,
Sure.
oh, they look like a fun person that maybe
Who am
I
I
would have
interested in?
in common with,
Yeah.
like things in common with. So maybe I can just ask them, hey, do you want to get coffee? And just see what happens and see where it goes. I mean, and Elijah and I are in the process of doing those kinds of things too with people that aren't in our life group but are like, oh, hey, they look like fun. Maybe we can
Mhm.
have them over for dinner. They look
Mhm.
like fun. Let's have a game night with them. And yeah. And sometimes you do that. And like you're saying, Dave, sometimes it's like, oh, okay, they're really nice people, but that was kind of 2 hours of awkward. Like maybe, okay, so where do we...
It didn't click.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. And that's not bad or wrong, or it
Right.
doesn't mean that, that there's anything wrong with that. But sometimes it's just I don't know. There's not like a nice, fun, cool answer. I feel like pretty candid. Like I was going to school in Colorado for my first 2 years. So I was doing that when I went out to school there. And then I transferred back here and it was at the middle of COVID. So then I was trying to find community here. And then we went and lived in London for a year. So I was trying to find community there. And now we're back. So I feel like I'm in the routine of just like, okay, we just put our
Moved again.
feelers out
Yeah.
and we see what comes back. And sometimes it's lonely in that process,
Yeah.
but that's okay too.
One of the things that you're saying, though, that I think is so important is you're taking initiative. Initiative and inviting people. You're like, hey, could we invite this person over for a game night or for a meal or something like that? And I feel like sometimes when people get stuck in isolation, it's in an expectation that other people will facilitate that community.
Mm.
Maybe the church will facilitate that, or other people will invite them over. And I just loved a comment that John made last week that like foyer conversations lead to coffee.
Mhm.
And there's this progression of, okay, so you bump into someone in the foyer, you're chatting, And you have to take that initial step of saying, hey, we should grab coffee sometime. Can I grab your number? I'll shoot you a text and we'll find a time. But that's an initiative that you have to take. And if you're waiting for other people to respond or to take that, you might be waiting for far longer than you want to. Like the onus of responsibility is on yourself.
But there's also a two-way street. If you're inviting somebody's receiving that invitation. So if you're waiting for an invitation and that's what you're thinking about, maybe flip the script and be the person that invites another to receive that invitation. I even think like building community early on, there's like you're coming into an established community and trying to establish more connection. I have connections. So in us having dinner together, I might have you and two other couples that you could potentially get along with. Like there's a place of like seeing people that don't have community and opening your own community for them to walk into. And you might not be their favorite person that they meet. Like if I invite you and there's 5 other couples there, which I don't have space for in my house, but just hypothetically, let's say that happened, you could like hit it off with another couple. And then all of a sudden I just facilitated connection. So I think there's all kinds of, no matter where you sit on the spectrum, you have established community, you're trying to establish community. Somewhere in between, there's active role for you to play in seeing and expanding the kingdom and connection to people around you. It's part of the witness that we have, right? I distinctly remember coming back to Stevens Point, and I had a friend that did that for me. It was our first year back in Point. I was working at Ross Schultz School District and met a person at new teacher orientation. She had like flown in from France. I thought she was the most like mystical being in the entire world. Because I'm like, look at you, just kind of hopping off, jet setting and coming back from France. Spoke French, was the English teacher. But she invited me into a group of people, 2 other couples. So there's 4 of us all together that met on a monthly basis to have dinner at each other's houses and just like bummed houses. And when you hosted, you get to decide what the theme of the night was.
That's so fun.
So it was super fun. I don't have great connection with those couples anymore, but that was a really intentional way for her to invite me into the community she already had, establish deeper roots with the people that she was with, but also invite Brian and I into that. It was just a really neat experience for us to not feel lonely. Because it's easy to be there. So, you had an easy bridge into the sermon, and then we bypassed it kind of.
Well, no, it wasn't time for it, but now it is. So, just that process. This week we were in Acts as we continue to Acts 6 in particular, and this complaint
part of Acts 6.
The first part of Acts 6, even though we did the second part just as a transition into next week. But just really, really talking about the first recorded complaint in the community. And John kind of, as we were processing this ahead of time, he kind of glossed over you think complaints still happen? Yeah, complaints still happen every Sunday. There's a couple of comments here or there, or every single Sunday about what is or what isn't happening and all that stuff. But just how it was navigated in the distinction. In particular, I think even processing this morning with my mom, who I got breakfast with. I know, it was super sweet. The distinction between peacekeepers and peacemakers was a really, really cool distinction. You want to talk about that for a moment, Whitney?
Sure.
Just going to throw the ball into your court there while I eat a cookie.
No way. Is this number 3? Okay. He's muted. So John talked about our job as a peacemaker, and I think the example he gave is between him and his brother at a young age. His dad came into his room, like, whatever you're fighting about, your job is to make peace with your brother. And making peace is seeing, I think, a conflict and taking steps towards creating unity or solution or resolution. Some other words, whatever. Peacekeeping is like, ooh, everything's fine. We're just going to I think everything's fine. We're going to try to just kind of maybe not acknowledge or not face what could potentially break the peace. So that was a helpful, like his illustration was a gentleman. Did you know the name? Neville? You did? From World War II, a gentleman that was like, we have peace. And he had Adolf Hitler's signature on this, like, I don't even know the story. Dave, you need to stop eating your cookie and talk about Neville, what you know about him.
I don't think I will.
Okay.
I've got half of this cookie left. So, yeah. So,
I don't know the full story about that.
we
that
don't
it
need
was.
don't need to dig in.
Don't need to dig
So,
into that.
No.
Anyway, this story in Acts 6 is about peacemaking. There is a complaint that is happening between two sects within the church. And I think John even starting the sermon saying, this is the first real threat to the church. They have been external pressure, and what has happened with external pressure is the church grows. It's really interesting. If you even there's a book that Brian referenced several times. Nick Ripken, Insanity of God, that talks about the persecuted church, and what happens when the church is persecuted is it just tends to expand in those areas where they're trying to stamp it out externally. But this was a complaint that happened internally and could have, John called it the first real threat, where it could have split the church and had this very real, we could have walked away from Acts 6 having the church of the Hellenists and the church of the Hebrews, which it didn't happen by God's grace because of the action of the apostles and how they stepped into practical peacemaking in this sense. As I was reading through this, so Gabby and I and another gal get together on Friday mornings and look at the text beforehand. I have, it's going to be interesting if Sophie inherits this Bible, if this is one that makes it, because she's going to think I'm the most confused person in the world when I'm reading. I write all my questions in the margins, and then I kind of work through it. But there's this I'm so confused about the interplay of relationships. If you walk through Acts 6 and you look at all of the different ways people can identify themselves, there's the disciples. The 12 is a pocket of the disciples. There's the Hebraic Jews, the Hellenistic Jews. There's priests that are being added to the number. Then there's Pharisees. Then there's a freedman synagogue that has people coming from all over that have different kinds of ways to be identified. It's this seemed like a story of people learning what it means to unify under Jesus, being the church of Jesus Christ.
Central identity.
The central identity.
Yeah.
You don't lose necessarily what makes you unique, but there's a central identity that how do we behave if this is our central identity now?
Mm-hmm.
That's really good. Think about a political season.
Yeah.
Right? Because we do have ancillary definitions or identities. I'm libertarian, or I'm a Republican or conservative or liberal or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we unite under a central identity of Christ follower?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's really, really good.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different titles. There's a lot of different.
It's hang on, what is happening?
Yeah.
Who's who and who's what's happening? There's just a lot of different ways to identify ourselves.
Yeah. And that's not any different today, right? There's the political aspect of that, but there's also a million other things that can feel like the most important thing. I mean, I work with teenagers, right? So everything is the most important thing in the world to who they are at that stage. So even thinking about this passage through that lens of how do you help yourself and the people around you just even sift through hey, that I see that piece of yourself and that's not bad or wrong, but I see that that's kind of become all consuming to who you are. And how do you reorder that? How do you make sure that actually know that stays under submission of who Christ is in your life?
Yeah.
And you need community to do that.
Right? Oh, my word. Theme of this podcast. Not just that question, but just for years, it just continues to come back to the question of how do you allow people, who do you have that speak truth into your life? Because if you don't have, you're missing out on one of the greatest resources Christ created for us, which is community, which is the church.
Yeah.
Identity, so important. Where have you both seen the need for peacemakers in your life or in this community context, sort of thing? Have you been faced with circumstances where you're I could be a peacekeeper here, but I need to be a peacemaker?
Yeah, honestly, it's usually because of my own fault. To be totally it's usually oh, I really messed that up, and now there's tension. So it's going to be up to me to, not up to me in it's only up to me, but up to me in the sense of okay, I made a mess of this, so it's also my responsibility to go and make peace with this person. I mean, I could just ignore it. It's way easier to ignore my mistakes, my shortcomings. It's way easier to say, oh, it's fine now. That didn't happen. I don't want to think about that. because you have to kill your pride in that and
Mhm.
saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I messed this up. So how can I help fix this?" And
Yeah.
sometimes the hard truth is, sometimes you can't fix it in the way that you want to.
Yeah.
But that's yeah. There's Christ for that too.
There's an interesting
Ooh, that's a line. Hold on, that's a
There's-
line. There's Christ for that too. Oh yeah, quote that.
I have, Gabby, you have a quote in my Bible on the page earlier. So she's just a quotable person.
Oh,
what's
boy.
her quote? Can you read her quote? What's other
This is from
quotable Gabby?
This is from
Oh, boy.
X5 when they're in and out of prison. And this was the sermon talking about fear of man over acting in fear out of man more than out of fear of God, and how that is upside down. But when you have an accurate view of who God is, her quote was, "Hardship loses its teeth."
Mm-hmm. Quotable
Yeah.
Gabby.
Quotable Gabby.
That's
I
amazing.
don't know what to say
So-
about that, but-
That's great. We should get a little coffee table book going.
With
Quotable
quote
Gabby.
peoples, yeah, sure.
Just Gabby.
Oh,
Just
I'm sure
Gabby.
there's some people that have better things to say than I do. But yeah.
John had listed at the end of his sermon, he had kind of 4 points, and I did pull out my notes again. A bunch of my notes got deleted, but
Wah, wah. When you use paper and pencil,
it doesn't happen.
Harder,
Yeah.
harder.
And then I lose it, don't have it. So anyway, just these 4 points, he said like extra learnings, right? That he had
Bonus
pulled in.
material.
Bonus material. Not necessarily pulled out of the text, but related to the context of the sermon. So don't minimize the struggle of those who are hurting. Stay focused. Don't get on track. Listen to understand more than you speak to make your point. All great. And then just, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
that piece of how often, I was thinking of that as you were saying, how often do the situations where we need to make peace result from our mistakes or our choices, poor choices. And so how do we lean in and just admit fault?
Mhm.
Man, that is hard for some
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
That is hard for all of us at different times.
Mhm.
But just to be able to say, I'm sorry, I did do that wrong.
Yeah, I think even the beginning of this passage is there's a complaint to be made, and it's made. And how many times do I keep complaints just in between my two ears and let it cycle and cycle and cycle?
Yeah.
Or do I grumble about it to the wrong people and not go to the
Mhm,
right source?
Yeah.
Brian and I don't remember why what the onus of the conversation is. I just remember Brian saying, "Oh yeah, you either diminish or deflect. That's how you deal with conflict." I was like, hello, like that's
Yeah.
kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Those were two big words that I need to now wrestle with. And I think John brought up in the beginning too, when you're looking at peacemaking, how do you handle it? And if you diminish, if you deflect, if you pretend like it's not a thing, if you dismiss it, then it's just it festers and it's not better. It's
Yeah.
just festering.
Sometimes it does.
You like to ignore things and they go away.
No, I mean, sometimes I can reasonably look at a situation and
Sure.
say like, this is a frustration for me, but it's not going to affect how I worship, how I interact with this
Sure.
person, how, even, and this isn't, peacekeeping is not always a bad thing. Right? That it's just not a negative. If you're able to keep the peace.
Yeah.
The example of Neville Chamberlain, he thought he was keeping the peace, but what happened is Hitler in World War II, like that was not peacekeeping.
Right.
So maybe peace placating or something like that is a better example of that. Because there's a time when I'm like, that's not how I would have done it. That's not how I would have said it. That's not my preference, but I can live with it.
Sure. It almost seems like a laying down of what can you lay down and,
Yeah.
and are
Yeah.
you able to? And that's fine. That kind of peacekeeping
Oh,
is
my
like,
word.
goodness, that's not how I done it. But I don't need to. This isn't my primary issue.
I've mentioned this before, but I think it's 1 Corinthians 6, Paul's admonition to the Corinthian church that has some legal infighting, right?
Mhm.
One believer is taking another believer to court. And Paul's like, why can't you guys handle this yourself? Why do you have to go outside of the church? But then he makes the statement towards the offended party. He says, why not rather be wronged?
Mm,
Like, why would you compromise the unity of the church rather than lay down your rights?
Mm.
He's like, you have every right to not be wronged here. Like that, you were wronged.
Yeah.
Why not rather be wronged? Well, what's more important? And I think of that all the time when I think of my preferences or my just how I structure. Like, why not just lay it down?
mhm,
Just let it go.
mhm,
I think it's a great marriage phrase.
mhm,
Why not rather be wronged? I
mhm.
think it's a great parenting phrase. I think it's a great community
Yeah.
phrase. But it can look like peacekeeping,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're allowing some,
Mhm.
some wronging to be gone to
And I think
happen.
there's a point of like, why not? Yeah, can you be wronged and just why not be wronged? And still allow growth to happen for you or for the other party. I'm thinking of specifically in marriage. That's something that applies to the three of us. Of like, why not be wronged? Sure, I get that. Apparently, I'm wrestling with that.
Mm.
But also, like, if there's a repeated wrong, at what point do you like this is actually
Oh,
a
yeah.
poor pattern, and where do I need to grow in this, and where does Brian need to grow in this? I think in both cases, whether you're peacekeeping or peacemaking, John's first point of respond quickly, respond in a timely manner, is a why not be wronged? If I don't do heart work with that, that can turn into bitterness
Yeah.
and a quick trigger to anger. So I think there's a healthy way to be wronged. Is that-
Well, for my money, bitterness is the dividing line.
Sure.
It's always the question of, if I don't respond to this, will I be bitter or not?
Yeah.
If I can move forward without bitterness, I'm going to move forward.
Mhm.
But if I get even a hint, I think bitterness is just the poison. It's the relational poison. It's the primary relational poison.
Mhm.
So many things, whether it's just annoying ticks.
Mhm.
I use this marriage assessment tool, and more than half of the people who take it, I don't know what causes this, but more than half of the people who take it come back with partner's annoying habits as a concern. And then they always come to me and they're like, what is this? I'm like, I don't know. Somehow in this, you signaled that your partner has
Sure.
an annoying habit. They're like, but what is it? I'm like, I don't know. You're the one who checked the box. Like, I don't know. Is it how they eat their food? Is it mouth noises at the table?
Could very
Is
well
it
be
where
mouth
they
noises
sleep?
for me.
Is it like, but you're bothered, and you've got to figure out if that's going to be something that causes and creates bitterness, or if that's something that you can tolerate and move forward in. Because it might not be a battle worth fighting, but it might be a battle that you need to make peace in.
Mhm.
So
How do you know when the bitterness is actually just something that it's like, oh, I'm really bitter about something that I shouldn't be bitter about? Like where's that line of oh, this is causing bitterness in me, so I need to address this with this person, versus, oh, this is causing bitterness in me because I'm being petty, and that's actually just kind of a me problem that I need to sort out with
Mm.
the Holy Spirit.
that's community, ain't that?
Yeah.
Like,
There we go.
that's just like, and that's walking the fine line. I think there's a fine line between, where do I take this? Okay, so let's say I have a frustration with my wife, and it's been going on, and I can see that like affecting my heart. One of the places that I need wisdom in this is, do I talk and I process this with a peer, a friend, or do I talk and I process this with her?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be talking about her behind her back. I don't want to be doing any of that stuff, but I might need to sort that out. And there might be a place where my friend's like, "Hey, really? Like, that's your problem? Get over that."
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Or it might be, yeah, you need to talk to her about that. And I think just having the people you can process that with. And they don't have to be someone super close to you. Like, they can be a ministry leader, like someone on staff here. Like that those are questions those are processes that I'm happy to have with people. If like, I'm just going through this, like, help me understand. Reach out to someone that you respect, a mentor, process.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and I always appreciate if somebody has some beef with me, they come to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's really true.
But that takes a lot of courage, I think, too, to face somebody and be like, "Excuse me, Whitney, you did something that I'm not happy about." Gosh, that's hard for me to do for somebody else.
Yeah.
So, but I'd rather, processing with a safe person, I think, is important in a healthy person, because that could turn into gossip. It could turn into gossip pretty quickly, and that's something that we need to fight against as well.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of good questions here that I'm like, that's a question that I've had for a while. Just even processing with a friend of like, what is bitterness and what does it look like? Is what I'm experiencing bitterness even, or is it just like anger at a situation? What's the difference between anger and bitterness?
Yeah.
There is a difference, I think.
Mm.
I think bitterness is infecting me. Anger, like, it's okay to be upset and say that this thing isn't right, but when it starts to affect the way I interact and my heart towards people, like that to me is a differentiation between
It's a poison that expands beyond the situation.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Um,
This is an area that I think journaling is helpful in too.
Yeah, that's
Um,
good.
and not just journaling. Some people, and at times I've journaled, I'm just putting my thoughts out there. But I
Mhm.
found it really helpful to be reading back through journaling too,
mhm.
and be able to pick up on patterns and rhythms, and be
Mhm.
like, oh man, I'm still struggling with that, or like that's still
Mhm.
a pattern. But I think being honest about how this happened and it's frustrating, then be able to see that in months or weeks or however long, again, be like, that's okay. This is a recurring thing that I probably need to address. Um, is just important. Like
Mhm.
Whitney, to your point of like we are finite people and we do
Mhm.
not have an infinite capacity. Our
Mhm.
God models an incredibly patient capacity to deal with our
Hmm.
reoccurring shortfallings.
Yeah.
He is patient with
Oh,
you, not
man.
designing anyone should perish. Like
Right.
our frustration with God's patience is like, God, come and fix it. But we often don't put enough weight on what his patience costs him.
Right.
He feels the injustice and brokenness and wrong of this world more profoundly than we do.
Mhm.
And he chooses to be patient with it. But he's an infinite God.
Mhm.
He is different than we are. So
Mhm.
we do not have that infinite patience. And so
Not at all.
being able to categorize it and track it and understand it and see it.
Yeah. This is kind of adjacent, but slightly, it's making me think of something that Justin shared one time. This was a couple years ago in one of his teachings. He was talking about a study that they did with kids who were playing video games, and they set it so that everyone would win like half of the time. So an equal, you won half the games, you lost half the games. And when they interviewed the kids afterwards, all of them thought that it was unfairly skewed against them.
Hmm.
So like our perception of what fair is only when it skews in our
It's weighted
favor.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think about that all the time,
Yeah.
actually, of how even just my own perception of like when I've been wronged or what I'm owed or
Mhm.
when conflict happens and why I'm right and I'm actually facing this grave injustice.
Mhm.
I just have to have that pause and say, oh, actually, because of sin,
Mhm.
sometimes my even sense of justice and what's right and wrong and what's fair is not actually correct.
Mhm.
So that's where you need the Holy Spirit and you need to pause and pray and say, okay, actually, where am I blindsided to
Mhm.
how someone else is feeling wronged and someone else is feeling, because if I'm feeling that way, probably whoever else is in this situation probably feels the same way too.
Mhm.
Yeah. And something in that too, talk Holy Spirit and then talking to peers. I'm reminded in this that as Christ following friends, we need to be graciously unafraid to call out pettiness
Mm.
in our friends.
Yeah.
There's such a culture of, the general response is that's so hard.
Mm.
Just this affirming,
Mhm.
but it's absolutely so needed. Like
Mhm.
we have to affirm hardship. And I mean, John, that was one of John's points, is don't minimize the struggle of those who are hurting. In no
Mhm.
way should we.
Mhm.
But we also have to use wisdom in acknowledging that our friends might not be right
Mm.
in their hurt. And I want my friends to be able to speak truth into me, to be able to say,
Yeah.
grow up, Dave.
Mhm.
Get over that
Mhm.
graciously and lovingly. And I want to hear that. But I also want to be the type of friend who can say that, who can navigate that, find that wisdom to be
Mhm.
able to say, like, you're looking for fairness that doesn't exist, or
Mhm.
you're feeling hurt in a way that you really shouldn't. You didn't deserve that.
Mm.
Graciously in
Yeah.
Christ, my brother, deal with it.
Yeah.
So those are hard
Mm.
conversations to have.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that makes me think about, am I the kind of person that can accept, like, yes, I would 100% agree that I want that in my life. I want people to come to me and say,
Mhm.
hey, here's a blind spot that you have right now.
Right.
Hey, here's where you're on your on your high horse and you
Mhm.
kind of need to get off it.
Mhm.
So making sure that I'm the type of person that can receive that well and doesn't get defensive or
Mhm.
diminish, right? Yeah.
I was going to say my husband's mirror to me is diminish or deflect. Like
Yeah.
those are words that I'm wrestling with now, and I want to be able to hear those. from
Mhm.
somebody that's trusted and knows me, like knows a lot of my life.
And both of those things can cause bitterness then.
Mhm.
If there's been a season of deflection,
Mhm.
that just, it's hard to resist that growing root tendril
Mhm.
of bitterness that
Mhm.
that grows. So to be able to have those that diagnostic wisdom given to you,
Mhm.
and then the wisdom to take it and say, okay, I just need to process this. Like
Mhm.
this is good.
Mhm.
That's really rich. Our spouses will be the best resources for this. We've been talking about community a lot. And
Mhm.
last week, I just want to keep in front. If you are married, your primary community gets to be your spouse.
Mhm.
That's just, there's such a blessing
Mhm.
in that role, the responsibility. So it speaks a lot to the need to be processing life
Yeah.
with your spouse and regularly talking and sharing and allowing their wisdom to speak into your heart. So, yeah.
I do think even as we're kind of talking through, Dave, you're saying even like calling out pettiness in each other. I think John's bonus material of don't minimize the struggle, stay focused on the topic at hand, but then listen to understand more than you speak to make your point.
Mhm.
I have had friends ask questions to understand my hurt that have led me to understand I don't need to be hurt there.
Hmm.
Right? Like
Yeah.
they're not making a point, but they're helping me unpack the situation that makes me see it in a way of like, oh, I maybe understand the other point of view a little bit better, or I understand what I brought into the scenario that was unhealthy in
Yeah.
a trigger right away. And so
Could you say that again? The first part. There are people who have helped you.
there are people that have, in seeking to understand my hurt, have helped me understand that maybe the level of hurt that I'm exhibiting, like helped me understand that maybe it's not there,
Yeah.
right? Like, or maybe
Yeah.
that there's a pettiness that's coming out that instead of making the point by speaking at me
Yeah.
and into my problem, they ask questions and help me turn the rocks over and
Yeah.
understand what's actually underneath it, in my soul and maybe the scenario. So that's the third point of listen to understand
Yeah.
more than speak to make your point. I have been the recipient of somebody who is really good at asking questions and helping me
Yes.
come to an
Yeah.
understanding myself more.
Mhm.
Like she's trying to understand me, but I come to an understanding of the situation even better
Yes.
because of her asking questions and causing me to tell her more. Help me understand this.
Yeah.
How did this happen? Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I think that's one of the best skills that anyone who's doing any kind of ministry can have is the skill of asking good questions.
Yeah.
Because, when I think about talking to students, nothing that I say will be heard as effectively than
Mhm.
something that they figure out themselves.
right.
And so if I can ask a question
Mm-hmm.
that helps them come to that conclusion all on their own,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be felt much more profoundly.
It sticks
And-
a little better too.
Yes, yeah, and
Yeah.
and that's not just true for teenagers. That's true
Right.
for literally everyone.
Right.
Nothing that I say could be more effective than helping them figure it out on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Put that in the coffee table
Quotable
book too.
Gabby.
Quotable Gabby. So, yeah,
Boy.
that's great. That's fantastic. Justin, for a long time, was keeping a list of my quotes,
Mm.
but they're quotes that he thought were just strikingly arrogant. And they were. Like when he read them back, I was like, I can't believe I say those things. And then he was just amused. And then he reset his iPhone and lost it. So,
Bummer.
yeah. So we can keep a list of your quotes, though,
Yeah.
that's a little bit more humble and a little bit more appropriate. So, which is great.
I even just think like you talking about an illustration that Justin gave, and you remember that one illustration, and it's marked something in you. You've wrestled with it. How many words have you heard Justin speak? And that's one that stuck.
Mm-hmm.
But it stuck because then you wrestled with it.
Yeah.
You know? And there's times that people will come and say, like, that thing that you said, and I'm like, ooh, what did I say?
Yeah,
and it's so
yeah.
much better if it's like this realization on your own and come into it. I don't know.
We're going to spin the spinner.
Let's
shift.
Here we go. We got a random question. It's going to be you, Gabby.
It's actually
It's Whitney.
Oh, it's
All right, Whitney. If you could magically become fluent in any language, what would it be? There's only two options in my mind.
Well, so here's like top of mind is I was just talking to John. He's going to lead the trip to Bolivia with Compassion. That's coming at the end of, like they leave very end of July and it's mostly in August. I was like, man, being fluent in Spanish is so fun when you're there and there's no language barrier.
Yeah.
So that was top of mind. Second is I would love to be able to read Hebrew text. I would love to be able to read Greek text. So there's my top 3.
All right, Whitney, you're 2. That was it. Spanish or Hebrew. That's what it is. That's the only 2 options. I mean, I can read Greek, so that counts. But what about you, Gabby?
Yeah, probably Greek or Hebrew would be very cool.
We're just such nerds.
Yeah.
We work in the church.
Yeah.
I want to read a dead language.
Yeah. No, I struggled with, I took French for 5 years in junior high and high school, and I was really bad at it.
Mm-hmm.
Elijah and I went to France while we were living in London, and he took French for less years than I did, but he remembered more of it and could speak it much better than I could. So I just feel like languages are just not my thing, probably.
Spanish is the only language I'd want to speak. So if it was fluent, that's the only additional language that I really want to be able to speak. But I'd love to read Hebrew really well. I'd love to read Latin. I'm pretty functional in reading Latin, just because I've sat around theological texts enough. But German would be another language that I'd love to be able to read because there's so much rich theology written in German that has had to be translated.
Sure.
And that's an area like, there's, you're reading the primary theological sources, but translated. Then the next step is reading primary sources in the language. And we'll see where we get there. So
yeah, I think I would like to speak whatever language on whatever trip I'm in. I don't.
Yeah,
the language barrier is hard.
Yeah. Come on, Lord.
Come on. Yeah.
But and that is Acts 2 is such a reversal of Babel. It's that he's moving his kingdom forward by overcoming some of what was in place even back in Genesis 9 and 10 and 11. So more tongues. That's the takeaway from this podcast is we need to speak in tongues more frequently.
More
original
flames of
language. More Pentecost, more spirit. So that's good. Hey, I'm going to get done with this podcast and eat another cookie because my limit given me by Gabby was 3 and I've only had 2. So can I have another cookie, Gabby?
You can.
All right. That's
gave you a 3 limit.
Yep.
I know. Which is good. All right. Hey, this has been Cabin Conversations. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, this has been 3.
3.
On to 4 next week.
I'm
Bye.
actually gonna... Anyway, bye.
On to 3 next week. See you in 2 weeks, apparently.